Nidhi Chiller, Additional Director, Lex Keeps. I welcome you all to the Lex Keeps interview series. Today present with me is AOR Akriti Chobe. Ma'am is a practicing advocate on record in the Supreme Court of India. Ma'am has drafted, filed and argued various matters before the Supreme Court of India. Ma'am has also worked on several mining, environment, arbitration and consumer matters in the Supreme Court of India. Hello ma'am, thanks for being with us today.
Hi, thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
Ma'am, you have a decent experience in the field of litigation. How would you describe your journey so far?
So the journey in litigation is never like an upward graph. It's always a topsy-turvy journey. Even if you ask any senior advocate, they will not tell you it was a smooth upsailing. It's always a topsy-turvy journey. And there are always moments where you feel distraught and you feel I have prepared so much for this matter. This matter deserves to be heard, and it gets dismissed. So all of those things keep on coming, and you just have to go along the way. So the journey for litigation is always topsy-turvy.
All right, ma'am. What was the thing that motivated you to choose law as a career?
So my father was a doctor. He was into forensic medicine. So he used to obviously conduct autopsies, etc. And he had a lot of lawyer friends because obviously, as a doctor who's giving evidence in all these cases, so he ended up making friends with a lot of lawyers. So from a very young age, I had the benefit of interacting with a lot of lawyers. But I also lost my father at a very young age. So, of course, once you lose your father, their friends, that connection goes off. Then after that, when I was, maybe I'll say later part of the school, 10th, 11th types, there were a lot of these cases like the Priyadarshini Mattu case, Jessica Lal case, where the reporting was always lawyer-centric. Like, media would report and there would be a lot of focus on how this lawyer presented and how when Mr. Jethmalani took the case of the accused in Jessica Lal, it was the first page news. And in both of those cases in the trial court, they did not convict the accused person. So all of those things made me think that a lawyer as a person can make a lot of difference in the society while doing their own work. Not, going a lot of these other professionals, what their, scope of work is different. And then they do something else to give it back to the society. With lawyers, we have the benefit of giving it back to the society while doing our own work. So that is something that kind of attracted me to law. And of course, I was a debater in school. So I figured that it will be a good shot to, go for law. That's why.
Ma'am, since you mentioned that you are a first generation lawyer, so what were some of the challenges that you faced during your initial years of career?
First generation lawyers, I mean, it's really difficult. Let me just put it out there. Firstly, when you're in law school, you don't get any internships. No one wants to look at your CV because it's not coming from a reference. And you can't even blame them because every firm, every lawyer is getting 1,000 CVs every day for internship or for jobs. I mean, they can't possibly sit back and reply to everyone and open everyone. And so until and unless someone refers someone, it's very difficult for them also to, open and look it up. Look up every CV. And so, of course, it required a lot of more work to get internships. It requires a lot of more work still if you want to switch jobs or you want to get matters. I mean, you do a very good matter, but, people will not remember you because you're not from the circle. So obviously, those kind of things are there, first generation lawyers, but it's not like first generation lawyers have not made it. In fact, for a long period of my life, for the last 5 years, I've worked with Mr. Ejaz Maghfoor, who is a first generation lawyer, and he has a flourishing practice in the Supreme Court now. So it's obviously at the end of the day, it's about your hard work, but to get that breakthrough, it's very difficult. I would say it is not easy, but definitely hard work. If you are there, hardworking and perseverance, two things you need to have. And if God's grace is there, you will make it.
A very true perspective put forth, ma'am. Ma'am, you cleared your AOR examination in the year 2018. So there are many students who also aim at clearing the examination. What would be your advice to them, and how difficult is it to clear the examination?
So the exam will not be difficult to clear if you've actually practiced in the Supreme Court. So a lot of people I have seen, they take letters from AOR that we are practicing under the AOR, and we are getting that, because in the Supreme Court you need to file a letter saying that I have practiced, taken training under an AOR for a year, and after that only you're eligible to give the exam. So a lot of people I've seen, they take the letters, but they don't really work in the Supreme Court after that. AOR might be also having a good practice in the High Court, and those people are maybe working in the High Court that much and not learning the Supreme Court procedure, because one paper entirely is practice and procedure. So obviously, looking at the Supreme Court rules, etc., will help you preparing for the exam, but it cannot replace the experience that you've had over the years for, while practicing the experience that you get, that cannot be replaced by reading a book. And secondly, it requires a lot of hard work and speed of writing, because once we join the profession, we are always drafting on the computer. So we are not accustomed to writing. So like the biggest challenge that I faced while writing my papers was in the first paper, which was practice and procedure. I remember I missed a 12-mark question because I couldn't finish my paper. My hand started to pain between the exams because it was such a lengthy paper. So that is one real challenge. I mean, many people I feel, really intelligent people, really hardworking people, and they've not cleared it only for the reason that they were not able to write in the exam. So that also, and so if you're practicing in the Supreme Court, as I said earlier, practice and procedure exam and your drafting exam, two of the exams you are expected to clear based on your practice, because if you're practicing in the court, you will know how to about the procedure, and you will know about how to draft, and just make your defects whatever. So if you want to clear the defects, then only you'll know what is wrong with your draft, and these are the things that I'm not supposed to do the next time. So all of those things. And the other papers, ethics is something, which again I feel it cannot be taught. You have those books for preparation of the exam, but AOR exam is not like your usual college exam. They'll ask you a straightforward question. They'll give you situations, and so in ethics exam also, when I was undertaking that exam, they gave us situations and they told us what would you do in that situation, what would your advice be. And so that is something that you will have to write extempore. You can't prepare for that sort of an exam. And even for the leading cases exams I found the most interesting, because you read all the fabulous judgments of this court. They're really lengthy, of course. It can get a bit tedious to prepare for that exam. But after reading all those judgments, you really feel that you've learned so much more than you knew before sitting for the exam. It's a list of 44 judgments, and all of those judgments are landmark. And so that's a lot of knowledge to be gained. But again, those questions are not like what happened in this judgment. They'll give you a situation, or they'll make a statement, and they'll ask you to critically evaluate it, how the law has developed over the years, etc. So it's a lot of critical evaluation. It's a very practical exam, which is very befitting the status of an AOR also, because as an AOR, you are not supposed to just provide bookish opinions, or provide a bookish draft. You have to provide a working draft to the court. The court is depending on you to get its first blush of the matter. The judge is going to read your SLP and decide. So I think it's very practical, and it can, of course, hard work is required, of course, everything apart, but you have to be practicing in the court for a while to take that exam successfully.
Ma'am, as you mentioned about the judgments, so my next question would be based on it. That how important is it to go through the judgments regularly? Like, how often do you go through the judgments regularly? The judgments passed by high courts.
It's always beneficial. Reading is never going to harm you, especially as a lawyer. If you read anything, it's never going to harm you. It's only going to add to your knowledge, I feel. And new judgments, there are a lot of times you're just having a random discussion, and because you have read something which was even though not part of your brief, but you've read it, better than others. It also helps in sometimes a client comes to you, and obviously you're not supposed, as a lawyer, you're supposed to research, etc., and then provide them with your opinion. But sometimes because you have read something earlier, you already know about it. So it always helps. Reading is something which is irreplaceable in this profession. There is no shortcut to that. You have to read. I mean, I remember briefing Dr. Rajiv Dhawan in the Ayodhya matter, and I still continue to brief him in several other matters. And I have never seen him going to court without reading all judgments that exist on the subject matter. Suppose for X act is being challenged in court and we are in that matter, he will read all cases that are existing on that act and then prepare for the matter. We can't even imagine how extensive that preparation is. But that's the kind of work everyone, even at his level, he's putting in. So, I mean, as youngsters, there's no discount to it. We must, as much as we can read, that is as many feathers we are going to be adding to our profile.
All right, ma'am. Ma'am, I would like to ask a question. What is the most memorable case you have dealt so far?
So I just mentioned, I think the most memorable case will have to be Ayodhya, because for the sheer controversy, firstly, it was a very controversial matter. And secondly, because I got to work with Dr. Rajiv Dhawan, I think that experience is something that I will value and cherish for the rest of my life. I remember when initial days of me briefing him, and he told me something which has really helped me in my development. He said, Akriti, you know all the facts, you know everything, but the notes that you're making are briefing notes. They are not notes like for a person who thinks like a lawyer. You have to develop arguments. You don't have to merely brief me now. Your job is to develop arguments. And from that day till now, if I see my drafting, it has changed and progressed tremendously. I mean, really, it was a matter where we used to work till 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning, and then be in court at like 10 o'clock. And the 5-6 of us juniors, all of us working, we were like a family living together practically, and Dr. Dhawan included in that. I mean, we never sometimes, obviously, most of the times when juniors are working with seniors in the matter, juniors keep on feeling that we have worked till 2 a.m. in the night, this person has gone to sleep. You will never feel that with Dr. Dhawan. He is someone who led the team by example. I remember one of the days in Ayodhya. So the hearings were happening Monday to Friday. So on Friday, after court, we used to go back to his office, and then we used to work from there. So we went to his office. So that was a light day for us. So he told us, okay, you guys can leave at 8 o'clock, and tomorrow come at 11 o'clock Saturday. And on Monday, we were due to rebut on some arguments. So I was supposed to prepare the factual arguments. And so when I came next day at 11 o'clock, he had fever, but he had gotten up at 4 a.m. in the morning, and there were 85 cases which had been cited by the other side. He had already read all of them and made a note distinguishing all of them. Can you imagine? So that's the kind of labor we put in. And now if we turn back and see, all of us feel that we don't know how we did it, because that kind of labor seems impossible. But we managed and we pulled it off, and all of us, I think, came out with something. All of us learned so much in this matter. It was I have to say it was the most memorable matter till now.
This is really great to hear, ma'am. Ma'am, you have worked with Mr. Rajiv Dhawan. So what you would have learned certain skills that are required to be a good litigator. So what would you suggest that are the skills that should be required to become a good litigator?
So if I talk about Sir, firstly, there's no shortcut to preparation. You have to know every word in the file. You have to know every case on the topic. There is no shortcut. He will read each and everything before going into that court. There is no. So first is that. Second is that he's very witty. I mean, when you hear him argue, there will never be a boring point. A lot of time these big matters are going on, and you're sitting there for a long time, and you feel like you dozed off in your head. I mean, you're physically present, your eyes are open, but you're really not paying attention to what the counsel is saying. It happens to be a lot of times, to be frank, that I'm present in the court, but I'm thinking about something else. That has, for me, never happened in Dr. Dhawan's argument. He would always, sometimes he would quote George Bernard Shaw, and, he would just spice up the argument. And one day I remember there was this argument happening about how doing parikrama of about the parikrama of the temple. So Dr. Dhawan made a joke about that he would go and do parikrama of civil lines in Lalabad so that he could get ownership of that. And it was just a light moment, and everyone started laughing in the court because in that matter it was the tension of for everyone. The judges were preparing continuously every day to come to the hearing. They would read up obviously to ask all of those questions that they asked us, and the other side was preparing, we were preparing, and all that media frenzy, everything was there. But in that moment also, he managed to crack a joke and lighten the atmosphere, and everyone laughed. So wit is very important. Hard work is obviously, as I say, hard work in reading is very, very important. These are the two things which I feel are his trademark.
This was something great to learn from you, ma'am. Ma'am, being a lawyer, how difficult is it to maintain a balance between personal and professional life? How do you cope up with the work stress?
So I'm really bad at it. First, let me confess, I'm a workaholic. But the work stress, if you say, you have to look at it from the point that it starts. Sometimes in offices there are all these weird equations between people. So from the time it starts, you have to see it from there. You have to always have a friendly relationship with your peers and your colleagues, and you have to I'll tell you an instance actually. So, and many times you do the best you can in a matter and it doesn't work out, and you keep on regretting, what did I do wrong, etc. So once I was coming out of I was arguing a matter in the court and I lost, okay? And I had thought that this is such a good matter and obviously we are going to at least get notice, and it was a miscellaneous day in the court and the matter got dismissed. So I came out of the court. So I saw couples are coming from the other side. I wished him. So he said, Beta, what happened? So I said, Sir, I prepared so much for this matter and it got dismissed. So he asked me, but did you put in your best, Beta? So I said, yes, sir, I put in my best. He's like, then it is for you to now forget about it because there's a fate of the matter. What can we do apart from putting our best? And that is something which really is the mantra for lawyers too. A lot of times, we keep on thinking about the case, what we could have changed, but there are times that you couldn't have changed anything. 100 times over, if the matter would come to you, you would do the same thing, you would do the same extensive preparation, and still maybe there is some point which the judges are saying, which, and the matter doesn't deserve to be heard. So there's only so much that you can do, and you have to come to terms with the fact that everything is not going to go according to the way that you have planned it. So that would reduce. And other than that, of course, you need to have some personal recreation activities apart from law. Like I really like to work out, so I do that. I'm also a cleanliness freak, so I like to clean places, and that makes me, relax. So apart from that, you need to have a very strong support system, I feel. Like my family, my mother, my husband, my friends, all of them are so supportive. And I know, whenever I'm feeling down out or, I'm feeling very stressed, they all are there for me. So I think these three things are really important for one to manage stress.
Great to learn it from you, ma'am. Ma'am, there's a divide between being an NLU student and being a non-NLU student. So what's your perspective on it?
So firstly, you're asking an interested party because I'm not from NLU, I'm from Symbiosis. And see, of course, there's a divide, NLU people get better placements right out of college, which private college people do not get. But at the end of the day, you will see whoever's risen to the top. It's not about being an NLU or a non-NLU. It's about how much hard work you put, how much talent you have, So maybe they have a little bit of benefit at the starting of their career, but I feel, it cannot last long if they are not up to the mark. So it's okay. They worked hard for getting that, for getting into an NLU, it's a very difficult job. So they get a little bit of benefit of that while, from the college placements, on campus placements really help in that. But then long term, I don't feel that, especially in litigation, people really don't care. Maybe in the corporate side, it's more. But in the litigation side, I have really not seen people saying that I will only hire NLU people. I have not seen that personally.
Truly said, ma'am. Ma'am, on a concluding note, what would be your suggestion to the budding lawyers?
I to feel I am only budding right now, but I'll just say that, there are times where you will feel distraught. There are times when you will feel, why are we doing law? We should just quit. But, you should believe in yourself. Believing in yourself is very, very important. That is the most important, especially in this pandemic times. I mean, lot of the junior lawyers, they've really suffered. People have lost jobs, and they must be. But don't think of it as questioning your self worth, is what I will say, because these are times like that. Of course you're talented, of course you're hardworking, but there are no opportunities at the moment, and that's why you've been laid off. So I just feel that believing in oneself and in one's abilities is very, very important. You might get rejected like 100 times. It doesn't matter. It doesn't reduce your self-worth. You keep doing what you do best, keep on putting the hard work, and will certainly come. Sooner or later they will come if you are putting in the hard work.
Very well said, ma'am. Ma'am, it was really an interactive session. I'm extremely thankful to you for being with us and sharing your
Thank
experience.
you so much.
Hope it also helps the upcoming viewers. It was great opportunity for us to have you with us, ma'am. Thanks a lot for being
Definitely.
with us.
Thank you, Nidhi. Thank you. Bye-bye.